In a metropolis where authority blossomed from the roots of silence, they believed they had perfected the art of corruption. From the dimly lit street corners to the opulent governor's mansion, an empire flourished on a fundamental truth. People would invariably opt for safety over justice. The illicit substances flowed discreetly through local convenience stores, while the cash disappeared into faceless shell corporations, and convenient scapegoats were readily available to take the blame when inquiries grew too intrusive. Then they apprehended Malik Thompson. They perceived what they wished to perceive, just another young black teenager caught in the wrong place at an unfortunate moment. He became the ideal diversion from their crumbling empire. What they failed to recognize was his closest friend, Jeremiah Williams, observing from the shadows. A reserved 14-year-old, Jeremiah witnessed everything. The man clad in an expensive suit, the enigmatic package, and the two seemingly flawless arrests that ensued. It is often said that the most perilous individual in any setting is the one who has nothing left to lose. Yet they were mistaken. Sometimes the most dangerous person is a child who still harbors faith in justice, clutching a truth whose time has finally arrived. When Jeremiah Williams stood up in that courtroom, no one could have anticipated that two simple words, "He's innocent," would dismantle an empire and transform their city forever. Before we return to the story, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. If you're enjoying these narratives, be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely won't want to miss. The cracked mirror in the boys' locker room reflected Jeremiah Williams's troubled visage as he adjusted his worn basketball jersey. The 14-year-old's dark eyes exhibited a wisdom that seemed incongruous on such a youthful face, though at that moment they primarily conveyed fatigue. Practice had extended late once again, but he didn't mind. Basketball was one of the few things that provided clarity in his chaotic world. The rhythmic bounce of the ball, the squeak of sneakers on polished wood, and the perfect arc of a well-executed shot were constants he could depend on. The locker room still reeked of sweat and old sneakers, mingling with the sharp tang of industrial cleaner. Jeremiah took his time gathering his belongings, partly to avoid the rush of other players heading home, but mostly because he was aware of what awaited him, an empty apartment and a pile of homework that wouldn't complete itself. "Yo, J-Man, you planning to live in that locker room?" Malik Thompson's voice echoed off the tiled walls, followed by his characteristic laughter that always seemed to fill any space it occupied. Malik's tall figure appeared in the mirror behind Jeremiah, still clad in his practice attire, his dark skin glistening with sweat despite having already showered. At just 14, Malik already towered nearly 6 feet tall, all lean muscle and natural athleticism. "Just thinking," Jeremiah replied, shouldering his backpack. The weight of his textbook served as a reminder of the math homework waiting for him at home. His mother, Lisa, would be working her second shift at the diner, and he'd have to reheat leftovers once more. The microwave dinner wouldn't be much, but it was better than nothing. "You think too much. That's your problem," Malik said, spinning a basketball on his finger, a trick that had become as natural as breathing for him. "But that's why we're best friends. You think, I act, and together we're unstoppable." His grin was infectious, the kind that made everyone around him want to smile too. Coach Wilson's voice carried from his office down the hall. "Thompson, Williams, lock up when you leave." The sound of jingling keys and heavy footsteps followed, then the distant slam of the gym's double doors. "Come on," Malik said, tucking the basketball under his arm. "Mom's making her famous mac and cheese tonight. You know there's always a plate for you." Jeremiah smiled but shook his head. "Thanks, but I should head home. Mom left me some work to do." It wasn't entirely true. Lisa hadn't assigned him any specific tasks, but Jeremiah knew she worried less when he was safely at home. They stepped out into the cooling evening air, their sneakers scuffing against the cracked sidewalk. The neighborhood wasn't much to behold, abandoned storefronts with faded signs, chain-link fences entwined with dying vines, and the occasional group of men lingering on street corners. But it was home, The setting sun bathed the worn buildings in shades of orange and purple, almost rendering them beautiful. A police cruiser rolled slowly past them, the officer inside watching with that familiar blend of suspicion and disdain. Malik's dribbling never faltered, but Jeremiah noticed how his friend's shoulders tensed slightly. "Coach says you've got a real shot at varsity next year," Jeremiah remarked, attempting to distract them both. "Those scouts at last week's game couldn't take their eyes off you. I heard one of them discussing college programs." Malik's usual confident smile flickered for a moment. "Yeah, if they can see past—" He gestured vaguely at himself, letting the words linger in the air. They both understood the implication. They had witnessed how quickly people formed assumptions about young black men in their neighborhood, how a hoodie or a basketball could morph from ordinary items into supposed indicators of threat. "They'd be foolish not to see how good you are," Jeremiah insisted. "You're the best player this school's had in years. The coach said so himself." "Maybe," Malik replied, his voice unusually subdued. "But you know how it is, Jay. One mistake, one wrong place at the wrong time, and none of that matters anymore. They just see what they want to see." The words hung heavily between them as they approached Miller's corner store. The fluorescent open sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale blue glow on the sidewalk. Through the smudged windows, Jeremiah could see Mr. Miller's balding head behind the counter, but something about the scene made him hesitate. A man in a suit that looked too expensive for their neighborhood was conversing with Mr. Miller, whose normally ruddy face had turned ashen. The suit seemed out of place, too crisp, too clean, too costly. The man's posture was relaxed, yet the way he leaned on the counter reminded Jeremiah of a cat poised to pounce. "Did you see that?" Jeremiah whispered, but Malik was focused on his dribbling, practicing the behind-the-back move that the coach had demonstrated earlier. Before Jeremiah could say more, a figure in a black ski mask burst through the store's door. The man wasn't large, but he moved with determination, clutching a small package wrapped in brown paper, nothing from the register, just that single parcel. The masked man's breathing was controlled, not frantic as one might expect from a robber. "Hey!" Mr. Miller shouted, breaking the evening's stillness. The masked man sprinted past them, vanishing down an alley, his footsteps eerily silent, as if he had meticulously planned this escape route. Seconds later, police sirens shattered the air, 2 patrol cars screeching around the corner, their response time impossibly swift, as if they had been lying in wait nearby. 4 officers leapt out, weapons drawn. Jeremiah's heart raced as he instinctively raised his hands, but the officers ignored him completely. "Get on the ground now," an officer barked, tackling Malik from behind, sending the basketball bouncing away into the gutter. Malik's face collided with the concrete, the impact making Jeremiah's stomach churn. "Wait!" Jeremiah stepped forward, his voice cracking with panic. "He didn't do anything. We were just walking home from practice. We've been at the school. Coach Wilson can tell you." "Shut up and stay back." Another officer shoved Jeremiah away, while 2 others pinned Malik down, roughly cuffing his hands behind his back. Their movements were practiced and mechanical, as if they had decided Malik's guilt before even arriving at the scene. "I swear I didn't do anything." Malik's voice trembled with fear, blood trickling from his split lip where it had struck the sidewalk. "Jeremiah, tell them we were at practice. Tell them about Coach." Jeremiah opened his mouth to protest once more, but caught a glimpse of something that sent chills through him. The man in the dark suit was observing from a black sedan parked across the street. Their eyes locked, and the man's expression was unmistakable, a warning. The message in his cold stare required no words. "Stay quiet, or else." "You're under arrest for armed robbery," the officer announced, yanking Malik to his feet. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane!" Jeremiah exclaimed. "Please!" Malik's eyes found his friends as they pushed him toward the patrol car. The fear in Malik's gaze was like nothing Jeremiah had ever witnessed before. This wasn't merely the fear of getting in trouble. It was the terror of someone who understood that the system wasn't designed to protect them. But Jeremiah stood frozen, the man in the suit's threatening gaze still searing into him. He watched helplessly as they shoved his best friend into the back of the patrol car, the same friend who had stood up for him against bullies in elementary school, who had shared his lunch when Jeremiah's mom couldn't afford groceries, who had taught him how to play basketball when everyone else laughed at his clumsiness. The patrol cars pulled away, their sirens now silent, as if they wished to avoid drawing more attention than necessary. The man in the suit climbed into his black sedan and drove off in the opposite direction, his tinted windows rolling up smoothly. Mr. Miller had retreated back into his store, the open sign now flipped to closed. The entire incident had transpired in less than 5 minutes, but Jeremiah understood that nothing would ever be the same. Jeremiah walked home in a daze, his mind replaying every horrifying detail. The package, the masked man, the suit, the warning look. None of it made sense, but he was certain of one thing. What had happened to Malik was profoundly wrong. The pieces didn't fit together. The man in the suit, the perfectly timed police response, the focus on Malik, despite Jeremiah being right there too. The street felt different now, more menacing. Every passing car made him flinch. Every shadow could be concealing someone watching. The neighborhood he had grown up in, where he knew every crack in the sidewalk and every stray cat, suddenly felt like hostile territory. He found his mother, Lisa, in the kitchen preparing to leave for her night shift at the diner. She took one look at his face and instantly recognized that something was amiss. Lisa had always been adept at reading him, picking up on the slightest signs that indicated something was wrong. "Baby, what happened?" she asked, sitting down at their small kitchen table, her waitress uniform already donned, but her comfortable shoes still untied. The worry lines around her eyes deepened as she scrutinized his face. Jeremiah recounted everything, his words spilling out in a rush. With each detail, his mother's expression grew increasingly concerned, especially when he described the man in the suit and the ominous look. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. When he finished, she remained silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that indicated she was contemplating her response. "You saw what truly transpired," she finally said, her voice taut with concern. "But sometimes telling the truth can be perilous, particularly when influential individuals wish to keep it concealed. We've witnessed it before in this neighborhood. Events that don't align, individuals who vanish or get blamed for actions they didn't commit." "But Malik's innocent," Jeremiah protested. "They're labeling him a criminal when he hasn't done anything wrong." "We were at practice. Coach Wilson can verify it. There are likely security cameras at the school that can confirm when we left." Lisa reached across the table, grasping his hand. Her palm was warm and calloused from years of serving heavy trays. "I understand, baby. I raised you to stand up for what's right, but we must be prudent about this. These people, the man in the suit, the officers who didn't even investigate what happened, hold power, and they don't play fair." As if to underscore her point, a car with tinted windows cruised slowly past their house, its engine barely more than a whisper. Lisa rose from her seat and cautiously peeked through the curtains, her expression becoming steely. The car drove past once and then circled back, moving even more slowly the second time. "They're watching," she whispered. "They know you saw." She pulled the curtains tighter, although they both understood that this wouldn't truly shield them. Jeremiah's phone vibrated with notifications. Videos of Malik's arrest were already circulating online, captured by bystanders too frightened to intervene. The comments ranged from furious demands for justice to harsh judgments about Malik's character. People who had never met him, who had never seen his gentle smile or heard his infectious laughter, were eager to believe the worst. Breaking news: local arrested in connection with armed robbery. The headline flashed across his screen, accompanied by Malik's school photo beneath it. The article mentioned alleged gang affiliations and a supposed history of dubious activities, lies, all of them, but lies that people would readily accept because they aligned with their preconceived notions about kids like Malik. "What should I do, Mom?" Jeremiah asked, feeling smaller and more powerless than he had in years. If I don't say anything, they'll keep lying about him, but if I do—" Lisa enveloped him in a tight embrace. She smelled of the diner's coffee and the lavender lotion she always used, familiar scents that usually signified safety but couldn't quite provide comfort now. "For now, you need to stay quiet and stay safe. We'll figure this out together, but promise me you won't do anything without discussing it with me first." Jeremiah nodded against her shoulder, but his mind was already racing. The truth burned within him, demanding to be expressed, but every time he contemplated speaking up, he recalled the man in the suit's frigid eyes and felt the weight of his silent threat. Now, it wasn't just his safety he had to worry about. They knew where he lived and could harm his mother as well. "I have to go to work," Lisa said reluctantly, finally tying her shoes. "Lock all the doors and windows. Don't answer if anyone knocks." She paused at the door, her face serious. "Stay away from the windows. If you see that car again, call me immediately." After she left, Jeremiah heated up his dinner, but found he couldn't eat. The microwave hummed in the quiet apartment, yet every small sound made him jump. The ice maker dropping cubes, the building's old pipes creaking, the distant wail of sirens that might or might not be heading toward Malik. That night, Jeremiah lay awake in bed, listening to cars passing on the street outside. Every engine sound made him tense, wondering if the black sedan was returning. His phone continued to light up with messages from their teammates, asking what had happened, sharing the videos, expressing disbelief. The last message was from Malik's mother. "Please, if you know anything that can help my son, come forward." Attached was a photo of Malik from the previous summer, grinning proudly in his basketball uniform after winning the local tournament. The sight of it made Jeremiah's chest ache. He turned his phone face down and stared at the ceiling, tears burning in his eyes. He had never felt so torn between doing what was right and doing what was safe. The truth could save his best friend or put everyone he loved in jeopardy. Through his window, he could see the street lamp's yellow glow casting shadows on his ceiling. Suddenly, one of those shadows shifted as another car drove past, moving too slowly to be merely passing through. Jeremiah pulled his blanket up higher, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. The next day, he would have to walk into school alone, sit through classes alone, eat lunch alone, and face the whispers and stares alone, all while carrying the burden of a truth he was afraid to reveal. The truth about the package, about the man in the suit, about how the police had arrived too quickly and known precisely whom to target. But for now, all he could do was lie in the dark, haunted by the image of Malik's terrified face as they took him away, and pray that somehow he would find the courage to do what needed to be done. Because somewhere in the city, his best friend was spending the night in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, while the real criminals drove around in expensive suits and police cars, watching and waiting to see what Jeremiah would do. The night dragged on, and sleep remained elusive. Each passing hour brought morning closer, the morning when he would have to confront a world that had suddenly become much more perilous and complicated than the one he had known just hours earlier. A world where telling the truth could either be the most courageous or the most foolish thing he could do, and he wasn't certain which it would be. The fluorescent lights of the juvenile detention center made Malik's bruised face appear even worse. 3 days had elapsed since his arrest, and Jeremiah sat across from him at the visitation table, trying not to stare at the split lip that hadn't fully healed. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on Malik's frame. He had already lost weight. "They assigned me a public defender named Peterson," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a weariness that pained Jeremiah to witness. "The guy barely looked at me during our meeting. He kept checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be." Jeremiah leaned forward, aware of the guard observing them from the corner. "What did he say about your case?" "He says I should take a plea deal." Malik's laugh was hollow. 3 years, maybe out in 18 months with good behavior. Says it's the best offer I'm going to get, being a young black male with gang affiliations. The bitterness in his voice made Jeremiah flinch. I told him I've never been in a gang, never even got detention at school. He shrugged. A memory flashed through Jeremiah's mind. The man in the suit, the package, the 2 swift police responses. The words burned in his throat, begging to be spoken. But before he could voice anything, Malik shook his head slightly, his eyes darting toward the security cameras mounted in each corner. "Don't," Malik whispered. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. They've been asking about you, about what you might have seen. Strange men in suits coming to ask questions. My lawyer doesn't even seem to care that I have an alibi with Coach Wilson." The visiting room suddenly felt colder. Jeremiah's palms began to sweat as he recalled the car that had been driving past his house each night, its tinted windows concealing whoever was watching them. The guard stepped closer. "Time's up." "Just tell my mom I love her," Malik said as they stood. "And Jay, stay safe. Some things are bigger than us." Walking out of the detention center, Jeremiah nearly collided with a group of reporters setting up cameras on the sidewalk. The police were holding a press conference regarding Malik's case, and the media had turned out in full force. Chief Bradley stood at a podium, his brass buttons gleaming in the morning sun. "We have reason to believe this suspect is connected to a series of robberies in the area. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of gang activity." Jeremiah's hands clenched into fists as he listened to the fabrications. They were portraying Malik as some kind of hardened criminal, discussing surveillance footage they claimed to have but never showed, and witnesses who somehow never came forward. "Sources within the department suggest this could be part of a larger criminal network operating in our city," a reporter said, holding her microphone toward the chief. "Any comment on rumors that these robberies might be linked to drug trafficking?" The chief's response was measured and rehearsed. "We are exploring all possibilities, but I want to be clear. We will not allow our streets to be overtaken by criminal elements, no matter how young they may be." As the chief spoke, Jeremiah noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. The man in the suit stood beside it, watching the press conference with a slight smile. When he caught Jeremiah's gaze, he raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. That night, Lisa was waiting when Jeremiah got home. She had taken a rare evening off from the diner, and papers were spread across their kitchen table. "I've been doing some research," she said, gesturing for him to sit, "about the store that was robbed." Jeremiah looked at the papers, property records, newspaper clippings, printouts from the city council's website. "What did you find?" "Miller's Corner store changed hands 6 months ago," Lisa said, pointing to a document. "The new owner is a company called Riverside Holdings LLC, but look who's on the board of directors." She slid over another paper, and Jeremiah's breath caught. There, listed among the company officers, was the name James Whitaker, their district's city councilman. "That's not all," Lisa continued, her voice dropping lower even though they were alone. 3 other stores in the neighborhood were bought by the same company. All of them have been robbed in the past month, and each time the security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. A knock at the door made them both jump. Lisa quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into a drawer. Through the peephole, they saw 2 figures, a man and a woman, wearing matching black jackets with Community Action Network printed on the back. "Mrs. Williams," the woman called through the door. "We need to talk about what's happening in our neighborhood, about the robberies, and about Malik Thompson." Lisa pressed a finger to her lips, signaling Jeremiah to remain quiet. They waited until the footsteps retreated down the hallway before exhaling. "They're not really activists," Lisa whispered. "I've seen them before watching the diner when certain people come to meet. They're connected to whatever's really going on." Jeremiah's phone buzzed with a news alert. Another video of Malik's arrest had emerged, this one showing more clearly how the officers had ignored his attempts to explain about basketball practice. The comments were a battlefield between those demanding justice and those defending the police. "Mom," Jeremiah said, showing her the video, "we have to do something. They're destroying his life over a lie." Lisa's face was troubled. "Baby, I think this goes deeper than we know. The councilman, the fake activists, the police chief. They're all connected somehow, and that package they stole, I don't think it was random." She was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. They rushed to Jeremiah's room to find a brick had been thrown through his window. Wrapped around it was a note: "Keep your mouth shut, or the next one won't miss." Lisa called the police, but the officers who arrived seemed uninterested. They barely examined the brick, didn't dust for fingerprints, and suggested it was probably just kids causing trouble. One of them, Officer Parker, lingered behind as his partner returned to their car. "Word of advice," Parker said quietly. Not looking directly at them, he said, "Whatever you think you know, forget it. Some doors are better left unopened." He paused for a moment before adding, "It's a shame about the Thompson kid. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong color. But that's just how it goes, right?" After the police departed, Lisa meticulously double-checked all the locks while Jeremiah swept up the shards of broken glass. Neither of them spoke about the officer's warning, but its implications were unmistakable. The police weren't merely neglecting their duty, they were actively complicit in whatever was unfolding. That night, Jeremiah found it impossible to sleep again. His boarded-up window made the room feel like a prison cell, and he couldn't stop thinking about Malik, who was stuck in a real cell facing years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Around midnight, his phone illuminated with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow at 4 p.m. in the library's reference section. Come alone and bring what you saw." Jeremiah showed the message to his mother in the morning. "It could be a trap," she cautioned, her expression contemplative. "Or it might be someone else who knows the truth and wants to help." "I have to try," Jeremiah replied, his determination firm. "For Malik." Lisa was silent for a long moment. "Okay," she finally said, "but we need to approach this smartly. I'll be outside in the car, watching you go in, but at the first sign of trouble, you run. Promise me." The next day, Jeremiah's heart raced as he entered the library. The reference section was empty except for one person, a woman in her 30s with closely cropped hair and weary eyes, typing on a laptop. "You must be Jeremiah," she said without looking up. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'm an investigative journalist, and I believe your friend Malik was set up to take the fall for something much larger." She turned her laptop around to reveal a complex web of connections: businesses, politicians, police officers, all linked by lines and notes. The store robberies, the corrupted evidence, the hurried arrests, they're all part of a pattern. But I need a witness, someone who saw what truly happened, someone like you. Jeremiah stared at the screen, recognizing names: Councilman Whitaker, Chief Bradley, Riverside Holdings, LLC. "Why should I trust you?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Because unlike them, I can prove everything I claim." She pulled out a manila envelope. "This contains financial records showing millions flowing through shell companies tied to the councilman. The store robberies were used as a cover for drug shipments, and there are falsified police reports. But without a witness to connect the dots, it's just circumstantial." "They're watching my house," Jeremiah said. "They threatened my mom." "I know. They threatened me too," Sarah replied, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a fresh bruise. "But here's the thing about bullies. They only win if we stay afraid. Your friend Malik isn't the first person they've framed, and he won't be the last unless someone stands up." A shadow fell across the table, and Jeremiah turned to see two men in dark suits at the end of the aisle, one of them painfully familiar. "Time to go," Sarah whispered, quickly closing her laptop and sliding a business card into Jeremiah's hand. "Think about what I said and watch your back. They're getting nervous, which means they're getting dangerous." Jeremiah walked home, taking a roundabout route and constantly checking for followers, but he couldn't shake Sarah's words from his mind. The pieces were beginning to fit together: the package, the staged robbery, the swift arrest, everything orchestrated to conceal something larger. When he arrived home, he found Lisa watching the news. Another press conference was underway, this time featuring Councilman Whitaker alongside Chief Bradley. They were announcing a new tough-on-crime initiative, using Malik's case as an example of the growing gang issue in their neighborhood. "Look at their faces," Lisa said softly. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They think they're untouchable." Jeremiah felt the weight of Sarah's business card in his pocket. The choice loomed before him. Remain silent and safe while an innocent friend suffered, or speak out and risk everything to expose the truth. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Malik's mother. "They're pushing for a quick trial. The public defender says we should take the plea deal. Please, if you know anything that could help." Jeremiah closed his eyes, recalling Malik's words in the detention center. "Some things are bigger than us." But perhaps that was precisely why they had to fight, because the larger the corruption, the more critical it was to stop it. "Mom," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I think I know what I have to do." Lisa looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay, baby, but whatever you're planning, we do it together. They might be powerful, but they don't know how strong we can be when we stand up for what's right." Outside, the familiar black sedan cruised past their window, its tinted glass reflecting the setting sun. This time, Jeremiah didn't duck away. Instead, he stood taller, watching it pass. They might be watching him, but now he was watching them too, and soon everyone would see the truth they were trying so hard to conceal. The coming days would be fraught with danger. He understood that, but as he thought about Malik in his cell, about Sarah's evidence, and about all the other people who might have been framed before him, he realized that staying silent was no longer an option. The truth was like a fire inside him, and it was time to let it blaze. Lisa squeezed his shoulder, understanding reflected in her eyes. "Whatever happens next," she said, "we face it together. That's what family does." Jeremiah nodded, already mapping out his next steps. The game had shifted. He was no longer just a witness trying to remain hidden. Now he was becoming something they feared far more. Someone ready to speak out. Someone prepared to fight back. Someone who knew their secrets and wasn't afraid anymore. As the sun set over their neighborhood, casting long shadows through the boarded-up window, tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, and new threats. But it would also bring hope. Hope for justice, hope for Malik, hope for everyone who had ever been silenced by power and fear. The truth was on its way, and not all the suits, badges, or threats in the world could stop it now. The courthouse loomed over Jeremiah like a mountain of stone and steel, its windows reflecting the morning sun with an almost hostile glare. After a week filled with threats, surveillance, and sleepless nights, the day of Malik's preliminary hearing had finally arrived. Jeremiah stood at the base of the steps, his mother's hand steady on his shoulder, watching people file through the security checkpoints. "Remember what we discussed," Lisa whispered. "Keep your head down and just observe. Sarah said she'd meet us inside." The metal detectors beeped as they passed through, and Jeremiah noticed how the security guards seemed to scrutinize them more closely than the white lawyers rushing past with their briefcases. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Through the crowd, Jeremiah spotted Councilman Whitaker conversing with Chief Bradley near the elevators, their heads bent together in discussion. The councilman looked up, catching Jeremiah's gaze. His smile was practiced and political, but his eyes were cold. He whispered something to the chief, who turned to glare at Jeremiah with undisguised hostility. Over here, Sarah Chen appeared beside them, guiding them down a side hallway. The journalist looked different today, professional in a blazer and skirt, her usual casual demeanor replaced by focused intensity. "Courtroom 3, but be prepared. They're going to try to paint Malik as a hardened criminal." They found seats in the back of the courtroom, trying to blend in with the small crowd of spectators. Malik's family sat in the front row, his mother's back straight with dignity despite her evident exhaustion, while his little sister clutched a worn teddy bear. "The court is now in session," the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. The Honorable Judge William Marshall presiding." Judge Marshall was older, with steel-grey hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He shuffled through papers as everyone settled back into their seats, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Andrea Pierce, rose first. "Your Honor, the state presents a clear case of armed robbery, with evidence suggesting ties to organized gang activity. The defendant, Malik Thompson, was apprehended at the scene. Objection, Your Honor. Malik's public defender, Peterson, spoke without fully standing. The characterization of my client. Save it for cross-examination, Judge Marshall interrupted. Continue, Ms. Pierce. As the prosecutor launched into her opening statement, Jeremiah felt his anger rising. Every word was a lie, carefully constructed to fit their narrative. She described the suspicious behavior of known gang members in the area, conveniently ignoring that Malik had been walking home from basketball practice in his school uniform. Peterson's defense was half-hearted at best. He mentioned Malik's clean record and Coach Wilson's alibi, but his tone suggested he had already accepted defeat. When he fumbled with his notes, dropping papers on the floor, Jeremiah saw several jury members exchange skeptical glances. The state calls Officer James Parker to the stand. Parker, the same officer who had warned them at their house, took the oath. His testimony was smooth and rehearsed, describing how they had responded to reports of suspicious activity and found Malik fleeing the scene. "And did you recover any evidence from the defendant?" Pierce inquired. "No, Your Honor," Parker admitted, "but we believe he passed the stolen items to an accomplice before we could apprehend him." Jeremiah clenched the bench until his knuckles turned white. The package, the real evidence, wasn't even being mentioned. He leaned forward to whisper to Sarah, but she subtly shook her head, pointing to the two men in suits, watching them from the gallery. The morning dragged on with more testimony from officers and store employees. None mentioned the man in the suit or the mysterious package. Mr. Miller, looking nervous and pale, testified about being threatened by a young man matching the defendant's description, even though Jeremiah knew he had never seen Malik before the arrest. During a brief recess, Sarah pulled them into an empty conference room. "They're building a wall of lies," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "But there's something else happening here. Look who's in the gallery. James Henderson, the state's biggest real estate developer, Robert Walsh from the Port Authority. These aren't people who show up for a simple robbery case. They're all connected to the councilman," Lisa realized. "Through those shell companies you found." Sarah nodded. "This isn't just about framing Malik anymore. They're sending a message to the entire community. Stay silent. Don't ask questions, or this could happen to you." A sudden knock on the door startled them all. A court officer peeked in and said, "Miss Chen, someone would like to speak with you." Sarah's expression turned steely. "Tell Councilman Whitaker I'm not interested in his offers." "It's not the councilman," the officer replied. "It's Judge Marshall." Sarah exchanged surprised glances with Lisa before following the officer out. When she returned 10 minutes later, her face was pale. "The judge knows," she whispered. "Not everything, but enough. He's being pressured to push this through quickly, but he has doubts. He asked if I had any concrete evidence of misconduct." "The package!" Jeremiah exclaimed suddenly. "Everyone has testified about a robbery, but nobody has mentioned what was actually stolen. It wasn't money, it was that package. The security cameras would have shown the real robber," Sarah concluded, "if they hadn't conveniently malfunctioned." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through documents. "I've been tracking similar malfunctions at other properties owned by Riverside Holdings. They always occur on specific dates, always when certain shipments are scheduled." The afternoon session commenced with character witnesses for the prosecution. Teachers who remembered Malik as troubled despite his good grades, a school resource officer who claimed he had seen Malik with known gang members, his basketball teammates, and even a neighbor who described him as intimidating, despite his reputation for helping elderly residents with their groceries. Peterson's cross-examinations were weak, failing to highlight obvious contradictions. When Malik's basketball coach finally took the stand to provide his alibi, the prosecutor skillfully twisted his words, suggesting that leaving practice early was evidence of planning the robbery. Jeremiah felt nauseous watching Malik at the defendant's table. His friend sat slumped in his chair, the orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on his frame, dark circles under his eyes, a testament to sleepless nights. Every lie seemed to weigh heavily on him, pushing him further down. During another break, Sarah received a text that made her curse under her breath. "They're pushing for an immediate arraignment," she said. "They want Malik to accept a plea deal before we can build a proper defense. 6 years reduced to 4 with good behavior." 6 years? Lisa's voice trembled with anger. For a crime he didn't commit. He'd be 20 before he got out. "They're hoping he'll be scared enough to take it," Sarah explained. "Once he pleads guilty, it doesn't matter what evidence we find later. The case is closed. The questions disappear, and their secret remains safe." Jeremiah watched as Malik was led back into the courtroom, shoulders hunched under the weight of the lies surrounding him. Something inside Jeremiah snapped. "I have to say something," he declared. "I was there. I saw everything. I can testify." "Jeremiah, no." Lisa grabbed his arm. "You heard Sarah. They've got powerful people watching. This goes all the way to the state level. They could hurt you or worse." "They're already hurting people." Jeremiah's voice rose with emotion. "Malik, his family, everyone in our neighborhood who's afraid to speak up. How many others have they framed? How many lives have they ruined because everyone was too scared to stop them?" Sarah studied him thoughtfully. "He's right. We need a witness, someone they can't easily ignore or discredit. A teenager who was there and can testify to what he saw. It could shatter their entire narrative." "They'll come after him," Lisa protested. "You've seen what they're capable of." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but they're also getting sloppy and desperate. The judge is suspicious, the media is asking questions, and too many people are watching now. If Jeremiah testifies, it could give others the courage to come forward too." As the courtroom doors opened for the afternoon session, Jeremiah noticed more faces in the gallery: community activists, local reporters, even some of Malik's teammates and their parents. The story was becoming too big to contain. "I'm doing it," he whispered to his mother, "not just for Malik, but for everyone they've hurt, everyone they've scared into silence. You taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter how difficult it is." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Together," she reminded him. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "I'll talk to Malik's lawyer and get him to call you as a witness, but be prepared. They'll try to discredit you, twist your words, maybe even threaten you openly in court. Are you sure about this?" Jeremiah watched as Malik was led back to the defendant's table. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Jeremiah saw past the fear and exhaustion to the person he knew, the kid who had taught him basketball, who had stood up to bullies, who had never backed down from doing what was right. "I'm sure," Jeremiah said firmly. "They think they can intimidate everyone into staying silent and accepting their lies, but they're wrong. The truth matters, justice matters, and I'm not going to let them take that away from us." Sarah nodded, already typing on her phone. "I'll have the evidence ready. Everything I've gathered about the shell companies, the pattern of robberies, the corrupted security footage. Once you testify about what you saw, it all fits together." The judge called the court back to order as the prosecutor launched into another round of character assassination. Jeremiah sat up straighter in his seat. Tomorrow, he would take the stand. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. He felt eyes on him, the councilman, the police chief, the men in suits scattered throughout the gallery. Their threats and intimidation had worked for so long because people had felt isolated, afraid to stand alone. But they weren't alone anymore. Looking around the courtroom, Jeremiah saw determination in his mother's face, professional focus in Sarah's expression, and growing hope in Malik's family's eyes. Even some of the jurors seemed to be paying closer attention, perhaps sensing that there was more to this case than they had been led to believe. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. Tomorrow, those shadows would begin to recede, as light was finally shed on the truth. Tomorrow, the real story would be told. Jeremiah wasn't just a witness anymore. He was becoming something much more powerful, a voice for justice, a symbol of courage, proof that even the most carefully constructed lies could be dismantled by someone brave enough to speak the truth. The cost might be high, but silence had its own price, one paid in broken lives and stolen futures. It was time to show that some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. Tomorrow, 2 simple words would change everything. He's innocent, and no amount of power, money, or corruption would be able to bury the truth again. Morning light filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as people filed into courtroom 3 for the second day of Malik's hearing. The gallery was packed. Word had spread about potential revelations, drawing more spectators than the previous day. Local reporters clutched notebooks, community members whispered among themselves, and suits filled the back rows like dark birds of prey. Jeremiah's heart thundered in his chest as he sat between his mother and Sarah Chen. They had arrived early, watching the room fill up person by person. Each familiar face from their neighborhood gave him strength, while each suspicious glare from the suits reminded him of what was at stake. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "stick to what you saw. Don't let them twist your words or rush you. The truth is on our side." Lisa squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you, baby." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge William Marshall presiding." As everyone settled back into their seats, Jeremiah caught Malik's eye at the defendant's table. His friend looked different today. Still tired, still wearing that oversized orange jumpsuit, but sitting up straighter as if sensing that something was about to change. The prosecutor, Andrea Pierce, smoothly rose to her feet. "Your Honor, the state would like to continue with testimony regarding the defendant's character and known associations." "Objection." Peterson, Malik's public defender, finally showed some spark of life. "Your Honor, I have a witness who was present at the scene of the alleged crime, someone who can testify to what actually happened that day." Judge Marshall peered over his reading glasses and approached the bench as the lawyers huddled with him. Councilman Whitaker shifted in his seat, leaning over to whisper something to Chief Bradley. The chief's face darkened as he scanned the courtroom, his eyes eventually finding Jeremiah. "The court will hear this witness," Judge Marshall announced. "Call them to the stand." Peterson straightened his rumpled tie. "The defense calls Jeremiah Williams." A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom as Jeremiah stood on legs that felt like jelly. His mother's hand fell away from his as he walked toward the witness stand, feeling every eye in the room boring into him. The suits in the back row were already on their phones, texting rapidly. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." Jeremiah's voice came out steadier than he expected. Peterson approached, his earlier lethargy seemingly forgotten. "Mr. Williams, where were you on the afternoon of April 15th? "I was walking home from basketball practice with Malik Thompson. We'd stayed late to work on some new plays Coach Wilson had taught us." "And what did you see as you passed Miller's corner store?" Jeremiah took a deep breath, recalling Sarah's advice. "We saw Mr. Miller talking to a man in an expensive dark suit. Mr. Miller looked scared. A few minutes later, a masked man ran out of the store with a package, not money, just a brown paper package." "Objection!" Pierce was on her feet. "This witness is clearly coached, reciting a rehearsed story." "I'm telling the truth." Jeremiah's voice rang out clear and strong, silencing the courtroom. Even the judge seemed taken aback by his conviction. "Continue, Mr. Williams," Judge Marshall said after a moment, "but stick to what you personally witnessed." Jeremiah nodded and then described everything. The masked man's careful movements, the police's impossibly quick arrival, the brutal arrest of Malik despite his obvious innocence. With each detail, he saw reactions ripple through the courtroom. Jurors leaned forward, reporters scribbled frantically, and the suits in the back looked increasingly uncomfortable. "And the man in the suit?" Peterson prompted. "Did you see him again after the robbery?" Yes, Jeremiah replied. He was observing from a black sedan parked across the street when the police arrested Malik. The man smiled. Later, I saw him speaking to... Objection! Pierce's voice sliced through the air like a whip. This witness is making baseless allegations. Your Honor, Peterson countered, suddenly animated, this is crucial for establishing a pattern of suspicious behavior surrounding the arrest. Judge Marshall raised his hand. I'll allow it, but proceed with caution. Jeremiah continued, detailing the surveillance of his home, the threatening note tossed through his window, and Officer Parker's warning. As he spoke, he noticed Judge Marshall observing Chief Bradley and Councilman Whitaker with increasing scrutiny. One more question, Peterson said. Why did you wait until now to come forward? Jeremiah looked directly at the suits in the back row, then at Chief Bradley, and finally at Councilman Whitaker. Because I was afraid. They made it clear what would happen to people who spoke the truth, but I couldn't let them send my friend to prison for something he didn't do just to conceal their secrets. Pierce stood up for cross-examination, her heels clicking ominously as she approached the witness stand. Mr. Williams, isn't it true that you and the defendant are close friends? Yes. I've known Malik since elementary school. So you'd say anything to help him avoid punishment? I'd tell the truth to help him avoid being punished for something he didn't commit. Pierce's smile was sharp. You claim to have seen many suspicious things that day, a mysterious man in a suit, a package instead of money, police officers allegedly ignoring your friend's innocence. Yet, you didn't report any of this at the time. Why should we believe you now? Because I can prove it. Sarah Chen's voice rang out from the gallery. She stood holding up a USB drive. Your Honor, I have evidence corroborating everything Jeremiah has testified to. Property records, financial transactions, patterns of similar incidents at other properties owned by Riverside Holdings LLC. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Councilman Whitaker jumped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. Chief Bradley was already moving toward the exit. The suits in the back row began shouting about inadmissible evidence and proper procedures. Order! Judge Marshall's gavel struck down like a gunshot. This court will maintain order. Through the commotion, Jeremiah noticed something peculiar. Mr. Miller, sitting in the witness box, had gone completely pale. His hands trembled as he pulled something from his jacket, a small recording device. Your Honor? Miller's voice quavered but carried, I have something else, something they made me conceal. Pierce spun toward him. Mr. Miller, I advise you to remain silent. But Miller stood taller. I've been silent for too long. What that boy said is true. All of it. I was threatened and forced to lie. The recording proves it. They've been using my store and other stores too, moving things through them. This is absurd. Councilman Whitaker's voice boomed. Your Honor, I demand nothing in my courtroom, Councilman. Judge Marshall's tone could have frozen fire. Bailiff, secure that recording device. Miss Pierce approached the bench along with Mr. Peterson. And someone find me a federal prosecutor. I believe we've stumbled onto a much larger case than a simple robbery. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Federal agents appeared as if by magic, some heading straight for Councilman Whitaker, while others cornered Chief Bradley before he could escape. The suits in the back attempted to slip away, but found uniformed officers blocking the exits. Sarah navigated through the chaos to Jeremiah's side. You did it. Your testimony was the breakthrough they needed. Once one person stands up, others find their courage too. Jeremiah barely heard her. He was watching Malik, who sat stunned at the defendant's table as Peterson explained what was happening. Tears streamed down his friend's face, but he was smiling for the first time since his arrest. Your Honor, Peterson called out over the commotion, given these revelations, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. No objection, Your Honor, a new voice chimed in. A tall woman in a federal prosecutor's suit had replaced Pierce at the state's table. In fact, we'd like to speak with Mr. Thompson as a witness, not a defendant. Judge Marshall nodded. Charges dismissed. Mr. Thompson, you are free to go. Bailiff, remove those handcuffs. The moment the cuffs fell away, Malik's mother vaulted over the divider and enveloped him in a fierce hug. His little sister joined them, still clutching her teddy bear, and soon they were surrounded by friends and neighbors offering congratulations and support. Jeremiah started to move toward them, but found his path blocked by the federal prosecutor. "That was very brave, young man. We'll need to talk to you too. What you saw, what you heard, everything. People like you make our job possible." Later, Lisa interrupted, appearing at Jeremiah's side. "Right now my son needs rest, and his best friend just got released." The prosecutor smiled understandingly and stepped aside. Malik broke away from the crowd when he saw Jeremiah approaching, and then they were hugging, both trying not to cry and failing. "You did it," Malik whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it," Jeremiah corrected. "All of us. You never gave up, never took their deal, and now everyone knows the truth." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing as federal agents led Councilman Whitaker and Chief Bradley out in handcuffs. Sarah Chen stood with a group of journalists, sharing copies of her evidence. Mr. Miller sat on a bench, giving his statement to federal investigators. But in a quiet corner of the courthouse garden, two families celebrated together. Malik's mother hugged Lisa, both women crying and laughing simultaneously. Malik's sister showed Jeremiah her teddy bear, solemnly informing him that it had helped keep her brother safe. Malik himself couldn't stop grinning, breathing in deeply of his first free air in days. "What happens now?" Jeremiah asked as they watched another wave of federal agents enter the courthouse. "Now the real work begins," Sarah said, joining them. "This goes deeper than one councilman and some corrupt cops. There's a whole network to uncover. Money laundering, drug trafficking, false arrests. But thanks to you, we finally have a way in." "Thanks to all of us," Jeremiah insisted. "You with your investigation, Mr. Miller with his recording, everyone who stood up once they saw they weren't alone." A black sedan drove past the courthouse, but this time its windows weren't tinted. Inside, federal agents were cataloging evidence. The car that had once symbolized fear now represented justice, and Jeremiah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "We should celebrate," Malik's mother announced. "A proper dinner, both families together." "First," Lisa said with a smile, "I think these boys need some rest. It's been a long few days." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Jeremiah noticed something remarkable. People weren't ducking away or avoiding eye contact anymore. Instead, they were standing tall, talking openly, sharing what they knew with investigators. The atmosphere of fear that had gripped their neighborhood was finally dissipating. "You know what this means?" Malik nudged Jeremiah's shoulder. "Coach Wilson's going to expect both of us at practice tomorrow. No excuses." Jeremiah laughed, and it felt like the first genuine laugh he'd had in days. "Wouldn't miss it, but you're going to be rusty after all that time sitting in a cell." "Please," Malik scoffed. "I was practicing jump shots in my head the whole time. Just wait and see." They reached the bottom of the steps just as the evening news vans were arriving. A reporter rushed up, microphone extended. "Jeremiah Williams, can you tell us what made you decide to speak up today?" Jeremiah looked at his mother, who had taught him to stand up for what was right, at Sarah, who had shown him that the truth was worth fighting for, at Mr. Miller, who had found his courage when he realized he wasn't alone, and at Malik, his best friend, who had never lost faith that justice would prevail. "Someone had to tell the truth," he said simply, "and once one person does that, it gives others the courage to do the same. That's how things change. One voice becomes many, and then even the most powerful lies can't stand anymore." The reporter asked another question, but Jeremiah was already walking away with his family and friends. There would be more questions later, more statements to give, more truths to tell. But for now, he just wanted to go home and rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring a better day, not just for him and Malik, but for everyone who had lived too long in the shadow of corruption and fear. The sun was setting over their neighborhood as they walked home together, painting the sky in shades of hope. The week following Malik's release unfolded like a storm gathering strength. Sarah Chen's investigation, combined with Jeremiah's testimony and Mr. Miller's recording, had cracked open a dam of secrets that refused to stay contained. Federal agents swarmed through city offices, carrying out boxes of documents. More store owners came forward with similar stories of threats and coercion. The web of corruption grew larger by the day. Jeremiah sat in Sarah's cramped office at the local newspaper, watching her pin new photos and documents to an evidence board that now covered an entire wall. Red strings connected faces to places, events to shell companies, creating a visual map of the conspiracy. "Look at this," Sarah said, tapping a document. Every property owned by Riverside Holdings shows the same pattern. Security cameras disabled on specific dates, matching scheduled deliveries from shell companies registered to offshore accounts. The package you saw was probably part of their regular shipments. "But why frame Malik?" Jeremiah asked, studying the complex web of connections. "Why draw attention to themselves like that?" "Because of this." Sarah pulled up an email on her computer. 3 days before Malik's arrest, a community watchdog group filed a request to investigate unusual patterns at stores in your neighborhood. They were getting too close. The arrest was meant to distract, to make everyone focus on gang violence instead of what was genuinely unfolding. Lisa, who had taken to accompanying Jeremiah to these meetings, leaned forward and asked, "And the councilman? Where does he fit into all of this?" "Right at the center," Sarah replied, standing as she drew new lines on her board. "Whitaker exploits his position to push through property acquisitions, obstruct investigations, and influence police assignments. But he's merely one piece of the puzzle. Look at who he reports to." She pointed to a photograph of James Henderson, the real estate developer they had seen in court. Henderson's companies owned half the port, a perfect setup for smuggling, using legitimate businesses as a facade to move contraband through multiple properties while having corrupt officials facilitate the process. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled everyone. It was Dave Morton, Sarah's editor, looking serious. "You need to see this," he said, handing her a tablet displaying a news alert. Sarah's face darkened as she read, "Chief Bradley was found dead in his holding cell an hour ago. They're calling it suicide." "Suicide?" Lisa's voice was filled with skepticism. "Or silencing?" "Exactly." Sarah began typing furiously. He was supposed to testify tomorrow about the department's involvement. Someone didn't want him talking. Jeremiah felt a chill run down his spine. "What about Mr. Miller and the other store owners already in protective custody?" Sarah reassured him. "And you two need to be cautious as well. These individuals are becoming desperate." As if to emphasize her point, Jeremiah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet. Now everyone pays." Before he could show it to Sarah, they heard shouting from the newsroom. They rushed out to find reporters clustered around televisions mounted on the walls. Henderson was holding a press conference outside his corporate headquarters. "These accusations are absolutely false," Henderson declared, his expensive suit immaculate and his smile confident. "This is nothing more than a witch hunt driven by sensationalist journalism and unreliable witnesses. A troubled teenager's testimony and a few disgruntled business owners do not constitute evidence of some vast conspiracy." The camera panned to show protesters gathering behind the media crews, holding signs demanding justice and accountability. Henderson's smile flickered for just a moment before he continued, "I have worked for decades to bring development and prosperity to this city. I will not allow my reputation to be destroyed by baseless allegations. My legal team will be filing defamation suits against certain journalists who have forgotten the meaning of responsible reporting." Sarah snorted. "He's scared. Look at his left hand, tapping his leg. Classic stress behavior. He knows we're close to uncovering something significant." Back in her office, Sarah pulled up property records showing how Henderson's companies had systematically acquired stores and warehouses along specific routes throughout the city. Each purchase was followed by staff changes, security system upgrades, and unusual delivery patterns. "It's not just drugs," she explained. "They're moving everything: drugs, weapons, laundered cash. The stores serve as distribution points, the warehouses are for storage, and the port provides cover for shipping it all in and out. They've constructed an entire shadow infrastructure." "But why our neighborhood?" Jeremiah asked. "Why target stores there?" "Because they thought no one would notice, or if they did, no one would care." Lisa's voice was bitter. Poor neighborhoods, minority communities, they counted on people being too afraid to speak up, too distrustful of authorities to report anything. "But they didn't count on you," Sarah said to Jeremiah. "One person standing up gave others courage. That's what scares them the most. Not the investigation or the evidence, but the fact that people aren't afraid anymore." The afternoon brought more developments. Federal agents arrested 3 additional police officers connected to false arrests in the neighborhood. 2 city council members resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons, and Henderson's company announced an emergency board meeting, but danger was escalating too. A store owner who had agreed to testify had his business vandalized. Sarah received threatening letters at her home, and outside Jeremiah's school, dark sedans with tinted windows had begun appearing at dismissal time. "They're trying to pressure us into backing down," Sarah remarked during another strategy session. "Classic intimidation tactics, but look at this." She showed them photos from community meetings happening across the city. People were organizing, sharing information, and demanding investigations into other suspicious arrests. The story had expanded beyond their neighborhood, exposing similar patterns in other communities. "We need to go public with everything," Sarah declared. "All the evidence, all the connections. Put it all out there, where they can't bury it." "Is it enough?" Lisa asked. "To bring down someone like Henderson?" With Jeremiah's testimony as the cornerstone, yes. He saw the package, the man in the suit, the coordinated police response. He can connect the physical evidence to the actual events. That's what makes him so dangerous to them and so valuable to the investigation. Jeremiah thought about Chief Bradley's death, the vandalized store, the threatening text messages. What if people get hurt? "People are already getting hurt," Sarah replied gently. "Every false arrest, every corrupted officer, every silenced witness, it all harms the community. The question is, do we let them keep hurting people, or do we stop it?" The decision was made for them that evening as they left the newspaper office. A black SUV swerved toward them on the street. Lisa yanked Jeremiah back just in time, but the message was clear. The danger was escalating. Instead of frightening them into silence, the attack galvanized their resolve. Sarah immediately called her editor, setting up a live stream for the next morning. Federal agents increased security around key witnesses, and community leaders organized a rally at City Hall. Dawn broke over a transformed city. Hundreds gathered downtown, carrying signs and sharing stories of corruption they had witnessed. News crews interviewed store owners, former police officers who had been pushed out for questioning dubious arrests, and families of people wrongly imprisoned. At 10 n.m, Sarah began her live stream. Calmly and methodically, she laid out the evidence. Property records showed the pattern of strategic acquisitions. Financial documents revealed the network of shell companies. Security logs demonstrated the coordinated camera failures, and witness statements, including Jeremiah's testimony, connected it all to Henderson and his allies. The response was immediate. Henderson's board of directors suspended him pending investigation. The mayor announced an independent commission to review all arrests connected to the implicated officers, and the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed a grand jury would convene to consider racketeering charges, but the real change was visible on the streets. People walked taller, spoke more freely, and looked out for one another with renewed purpose. The mighty shadow of fear that had loomed over the neighborhood for so long was lifting. That afternoon, Jeremiah and Malik shot baskets at their local court, just like old times, but now they noticed details they had once ignored: the timing of certain deliveries at nearby stores, the patterns of unfamiliar cars passing through, and the way some people seemed to communicate in subtle signals. "You know what's crazy?" Malik said, dribbling slowly. All this time we thought we were just living our lives, trying to stay out of trouble, but really we were surrounded by trouble. They created trouble. Jeremiah nodded, thinking about how his decision to speak up in court had triggered such massive changes. Do you think it'll really be different now? Look around. Malik gestured to the street where neighbors chatted openly on stoops. Children played without fearful parents hovering nearby, and even the air seemed lighter somehow. It's already different. You showed people they don't have to be afraid. Sarah's stories continued to break new ground. Each revelation led to more discoveries, more arrests, and more evidence of how deep the corruption had spread. Henderson's empire began to crumble as investors pulled out and partners distanced themselves. But the most profound changes were happening at the community level. Former rivals started working together, sharing information and resources to prevent similar schemes from taking root. Youth organizations partnered with reformed police officers to build trust and communication, and store owners formed networks to support each other and report suspicious activities. A month after Malik's release, the neighborhood held a celebration, not just for him, but for everyone who had found their voice, everyone who had chosen truth over fear. The basketball court where it all began was transformed into a community gathering space with food, music, and hundreds of people sharing stories and hope. Jeremiah stood with his mother and Sarah, watching families that had once been afraid to leave their homes now dancing in the street. Mr. Miller was there, his store reopened under community ownership. Even some of the federal agents who had worked the case stopped by, now greeted with cautious respect instead of fear. "You know this isn't over," Sarah reminded them. "Henderson still has allies. There are other cities, other schemes. People like that don't give up power easily." "No," Jeremiah agreed, "but now we know what to look for. More importantly, we know what happens when people stand together." Lisa hugged him close. "You started something bigger than yourself, baby. Something that can't be stopped by threats or intimidation anymore." As the sun set over their transformed neighborhood, Jeremiah reflected on all the moments that had led to this one. The fear when he first witnessed the robbery, the pain of watching Malik's arrest, the courage it took to speak up, and the strength they had all found in standing together. The truth had cost them their illusion of safety, but it had given them something far more valuable, real power, the kind that comes from unity and purpose. The shadows hadn't disappeared completely. There would always be people who abused power and preyed on fear and silence. But now they faced a community that knew its strength, that understood the importance of speaking up, and that refused to be controlled by fear. As children played freely on the court where he and Malik had once practiced in nervous silence, Jeremiah realized that some victories weren't about defeating an enemy. They were about transforming fear into strength, silence into voice, and isolation into unity. The game had changed, and this time the whole community was winning. The morning headlines screamed across every news outlet in the city. Police Chief Bradley's death ruled suspicious, evidence of foul play. Jeremiah stared at his phone screen, the words blurring as memories of the chief's threatening glares in the courtroom flooded back. Sarah Chen had been right. This was far from over. "They're covering their tracks," Sarah explained, pacing her office while federal agents examined new evidence. Bradley's death wasn't just about silencing him. It was a message to anyone else thinking of speaking out. Agent Diana Roberts, the lead federal investigator, spread photographs across Sarah's desk. They showed the police chief's cell in detail, things that didn't add up, marks that shouldn't have been there, and camera footage that mysteriously cut out during crucial minutes. "We found this in his personal effects," Agent Roberts said, holding up a sealed envelope. "It was meant to be delivered to his lawyer if anything happened to him." She carefully opened it, revealing pages of handwritten notes and a small USB drive. Sarah quickly scanned the papers, her expression growing darker. He was building a case, names, dates, locations, everything about Henderson's operation. He was aware they would eventually come for him, but why hadn't he come forward sooner? Jeremiah pondered, glancing at the chief's cramped handwriting. Because of this, Agent Roberts indicated a name that appeared repeatedly in the notes: Governor Michael Sullivan. The room fell silent. Sarah was the first to break the silence. The governor, he's involved. It explains everything, Agent Roberts replied grimly. Why the corruption has gone unchecked for so long, why investigations were obstructed, and why Bradley felt he couldn't trust anyone. Lisa, who had been quietly listening, chimed in. That's why they were so confident in framing Malik. They believed they were untouchable. The USB drive contained videos, security footage that Bradley had secretly preserved, showcasing meetings between Henderson, corrupt officers, and high-ranking officials. One clip clearly depicted the governor himself visiting Henderson's office late at night, leaving with a briefcase that hadn't been there when he arrived. This goes beyond drug smuggling, Sarah realized as she re-watched the footage. They're utilizing the same network to funnel campaign contributions, bribes, everything. The governor has been aiding them in expanding to other cities. A knock at the door startled everyone. It was Mr. Miller, looking anxious yet determined. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. He pulled out his phone, displaying a private message he had received. All charges dropped if you recant. Think about your family. They're desperate, Agent Roberts observed, making mistakes after Bradley's death. These threats, they're showing their hand. Sarah's computer chimed with an email alert. Her source at the Port Authority had sent shipping manifests, dozens of containers with falsified contents, all linked to Henderson's companies. But more importantly, they revealed similar patterns at ports in other states. It's not just our city, Sarah said, mapping the connections. They're establishing identical operations everywhere, buying properties along strategic routes, installing corrupt officials, using local gangs as cover, and framing innocent kids like Malik when they need a distraction. Jeremiah added bitterly, Exactly. Agent Roberts examined the manifests. This is sufficient for search warrants. We can coordinate with other field offices and hit multiple locations simultaneously. But before they could act, breaking news flashed across Sarah's computer. Governor Sullivan was calling an emergency press conference. They crowded around the screen to watch. The governor looked impeccable as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced and composed. My fellow citizens, he began, I am deeply troubled by recent allegations of corruption in our great city. I want to assure you that my office takes these claims seriously. Listen to how he distances himself, Sarah murmured, setting up others to take the fall. And while some may try to twist these events for political gain, the governor continued, I remain focused on serving the people. That's why I'm announcing a special task force to investigate any credible allegations of wrongdoing. His own task force? Agent Roberts scoffed. To control the investigation? I'm confident that once the facts emerge, the truth will be clear. Thank you, and God bless our great state. As reporters shouted questions, the camera captured something intriguing in the background. Partially hidden by curtains, a familiar figure in a dark suit watched the proceedings. It was the same man Jeremiah had seen outside Miller's store on the day of the robbery. Got you, Sarah whispered, freezing the frame. Agent Roberts, run facial recognition on this. I bet he's our link between Henderson and the governor. The results returned quickly. Thomas Ward, Agent Roberts read. Former Special Forces, now head of security for several of Henderson's companies. No criminal record, but his name comes up in multiple investigations that were suddenly dropped. He's their cleaner, Sarah realized. When something needs to be handled discreetly, like with Bradley, Ward takes care of it. Jeremiah's phone buzzed with a text from Malik. Better watch the news. Something big is happening at the port. They switched to live coverage, revealing police and federal agents swarming Henderson's main shipping terminal. But something seemed off. Containers were already being moved, documents were burning in barrels, and computers were being cleared. They knew we were coming, Agent Roberts said, already dialing her superiors. Someone tipped them off. The governor's press conference was a distraction. Sarah was typing furiously, coordinating with other journalists as reports flooded in from across the city, detailing similar scenes at warehouses and storage facilities, anywhere evidence might be hidden. It was a coordinated cleanup operation. "We can't let them destroy everything," Jeremiah protested. "There has to be something we can do." "There is." Sarah pulled up a message from one of her sources. "Henderson's planning to escape on a private plane, fueled and waiting at a small airstrip outside the city. If he gets away—" "He doesn't," Agent Roberts said firmly. "Mrs. Williams, can you get Mr. Miller to safety? Jeremiah, we'll need your testimony about Ward. You're the only one who can place him at the scene of the crime." "What about the governor?" Lisa asked. "One thing at a time. First, we stop Henderson. Without him, the whole network starts to crumble." They split up quickly. Federal agents moved to secure the airstrip, while Sarah coordinated with her media contacts to ensure everything was documented. But as Jeremiah and Agent Roberts drove toward the federal building, a black SUV pulled alongside them. "Ward!" Agent Roberts breathed, recognizing the driver. She swerved just as he attempted to force them off the road. What followed was a tense chase through the city streets. Ward's SUV stayed close, repeatedly trying to either stop them or force a crash. Agent Roberts drove skillfully, but they were running out of options. "Call for backup," she ordered. "Jeremiah, hold on." She turned sharply into an alley, then another, attempting to lose their pursuer. But Ward knew these streets too well. Each time they thought they had lost him, the SUV reappeared. "He's not trying to kill us," Agent Roberts realized. "He's trying to hurt us." She was right. They found themselves forced toward the abandoned industrial district, where empty warehouses created a maze of blind corners and dead ends, perfect for an ambush. But Ward had made one critical mistake. He had become predictable. Agent Roberts waited until he tried to force them down a specific street, then suddenly braked and spun the car around. Ward's SUV shot past them, and now they were the pursuers. "Backup's almost here," Jeremiah reported, hearing sirens in the distance. Ward must have heard them too. He accelerated, taking increasingly desperate risks until he finally misjudged a turn. The SUV clipped a concrete barrier and flipped, sliding to a stop against a chain-link fence. By the time they reached the wreck, Ward was gone. But he had left something behind. In his haste to escape, he had dropped a phone. Agent Roberts quickly secured it in an evidence bag. "This could be better than catching him," she said. "These types of guys never delete anything. They're too arrogant." She was right. Ward's phone was a treasure trove of information, messages, photos, coordinates, all documenting the conspiracy's operations. Most importantly, it contained detailed instructions about the cleanup operation, sent directly from Governor Sullivan's private number. Within hours, everything changed. Federal agents, now armed with irrefutable evidence, moved simultaneously across the city. Henderson was arrested while attempting to board his private plane, and Ward was caught trying to flee by boat. The governor, watching it all unfold on television, was confronted by state police in his own office. "Stay with us," Agent Roberts told Jeremiah as they watched the arrests unfold. "Until this is over, you're still our key witness, and they still have people out there." But something had shifted in the city. As news of the arrests spread, more people began to come forward. Other communities reported similar patterns of corruption and false arrests, and other journalists began uncovering connections to criminal operations in their own cities. The story grew larger than any single witness or testimony. It became about something more significant, about what happens when people refuse to be silenced, when communities stand together against corruption, and when truth finally overcomes fear. Late that night, Jeremiah sat with Sarah in her office, watching her update her evidence board one last time. The red strings now stretched beyond their city, connecting to other places where the same pattern was being uncovered. "You know what's remarkable?" Sarah said, stepping back to survey the board. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day in court. One person's courage changed everything." "Not one person," Jeremiah corrected her. "All of us together. You with your investigation, Mr. Miller with his recording, Agent Roberts believing us, My mum standing by me, Malik staying strong. Everyone played a part. Sarah smiled. That's what they never understood. They thought power came from fear, from forcing people to remain silent. But real power comes from people standing together, speaking truth, and refusing to be afraid. Through the window, they could see the city lights twinkling. Somewhere out there, corrupt officials were spending their first night in cells. Evidence was being catalogued, investigations were expanding, and communities were beginning to heal. The conspiracy had been vast, reaching to the highest levels of power, but in the end it had been dismantled, not by any single piece of evidence or dramatic revelation, but by the cumulative courage of ordinary people who decided that truth mattered more than fear. What happens next? Jeremiah asked, thinking about all the lives that had been affected by this, the people wrongly imprisoned, the communities terrorized, the families torn apart. Justice happens next, Sarah replied. Real justice, not the kind they twisted to serve their purposes. It won't be quick or easy, but it will be real. Outside, a police car drove past, one of the good ones, now part of the department's reformed patrol units. Its presence no longer inspired fear, but offered a cautious hope that things could genuinely change. The city would never be the same, but maybe, Jeremiah thought, that was the point. Maybe it needed to be. Change was essential to confront its shadows, heal its wounds, and learn how to unite. The conspiracy had run deep, but the truth ran even deeper, and in the end, that made all the difference. The police radio crackled with encrypted transmissions as Agent Roberts's vehicle sped through the pre-dawn darkness. Jeremiah sat in the back seat, his heart racing as he clutched his phone, on which he had just recorded the most perilous conversation of his life. 2 hours earlier, he had been asleep when Sarah's urgent call came through. "We found the police chief's final recording," she had said, her voice taut with tension. He wasn't just documenting corruption, he was capturing a meeting between Henderson and the governor. They were planning something significant, something happening tonight. Now, as streetlights flashed past the car windows, Jeremiah replayed the events that had led them to this moment. After receiving Sarah's call, he had gone to the abandoned warehouse where she had tracked Ward's phone signal. Hidden behind old crates, he recorded Ward's conversation with Henderson's remaining lieutenants, detailing their plans to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, and flee the country with millions in laundered money. "How much time do we have?" Jeremiah asked, watching Agent Roberts navigate the empty streets. "The governor's private jet is scheduled for takeoff in 90 minutes, she replied, glancing at her watch. "But first, we need to secure that recording and get it to the federal prosecutor. Without it, we can't stop them legally." Lisa, sitting in the front passenger seat, turned to look at her son. "Are you sure about what you heard regarding the journalist?" Jeremiah nodded grimly. They had taken Sarah. The conversation he recorded made that abundantly clear. She was being held at a remote facility, interrogated about her sources and evidence. They planned to make her disappearance appear to be an accident, just like Chief Bradley's supposed suicide. "Turn here," Agent Roberts commanded suddenly, cutting the headlights as they approached a private airstrip on the city's outskirts. Security cameras swept the perimeter, but she had already disabled them remotely. "Remember the plan? We get in, secure the recording, rescue Sarah, and stop that plane. The rest of my team will handle the governor's security detail." They parked behind an old hangar, using its bulk to shield them from view. Other federal agents were already in position, waiting for the signal. Everything hinged on timing. Move too soon, and the governor's people would destroy the evidence. Move too late, and they'd escape with both the money and their secrets. "Someone's coming," Lisa whispered, pointing to approaching headlights. 3 black SUVs rolled onto the airstrip, followed by a sleek limousine. From their hiding place, they watched as Ward stepped out first, scanning the area before opening the limousine's door. Governor Sullivan emerged, looking impeccable even at this early hour. Henderson followed, carrying a metal briefcase. "That's it," Agent Roberts breathed. The evidence. They're planning to destroy everything that connects them to the smuggling operation. More vehicles arrived. Private security, corrupt officers, everyone who had profited from the conspiracy gathering for their escape. Among them, Jeremiah spotted the man who had threatened Mr. Miller and the officers who had framed Malik, faces that had haunted their neighborhood for years. A figure was dragged from one of the SUVs. Sarah, her hands bound, her face bruised, but her expression defiant. Ward gripped her arm, steering her toward the waiting plane. "Now!" Agent Roberts said into her radio. "Move in." Floodlights suddenly illuminated the airstrip as federal agents emerged from every shadow. "FBI, freeze! Put your hands where we can see them!" Chaos erupted. The governor's security detail drew weapons. Ward shoved Sarah aside and reached for his gun. Henderson bolted for the plane, still clutching the briefcase. "Stay here," Lisa ordered Jeremiah as she and Agent Roberts joined the federal team. But Jeremiah saw something they had overlooked. While everyone focused on the confrontation, one of Henderson's men was sneaking toward Sarah, who lay dazed where Ward had pushed her. The man's intentions were clear in the glint of steel in his hand. Without thinking, Jeremiah sprinted from cover. He tackled the man just as he reached Sarah, sending them both crashing to the tarmac. The knife skittered away into the darkness. Sarah's eyes widened as he helped her up. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your life," he managed, ducking as gunfire erupted nearby. "Come on." They ran for cover behind fuel tanks as the federal agents engaged in a firefight with the governor's security team. Through the chaos, Jeremiah saw Henderson reaching the plane steps. "The briefcase," Sarah gasped. "We can't let them destroy that evidence." Jeremiah had an idea. He pulled out his phone, still recording, and pressed send. The video of Ward's warehouse conversation uploaded to Sarah's secure server, automatically copying to news outlets nationwide. "Even if they escape, the truth is already out," he told her. A bullet pinged off the fuel tank, making them both flinch. Agent Roberts was advancing with her team, forcing the corrupt security detail to retreat. But Ward had broken free in the confusion, running toward the plane where Henderson waited. "Federal agents, stop, or we'll shoot." The governor raised his hands, his political smile finally cracking as agents surrounded him. But Henderson and Ward reached the plane, its engines already roaring to life. "They're getting away." Sarah tried to stand, but Jeremiah pulled her back as more shots rang out. Then something unexpected happened. The plane's door opened again, and Henderson stumbled out, falling down the steps. Behind him stood Lisa Williams, holding the briefcase. "Mom," Jeremiah gasped. While everyone had focused on the firefight, Lisa had circled around and snuck aboard the plane. Now she stood in the doorway, the evidence secure in her hands. "It's over," she called to Ward, who still gripped his weapon. "Think about it. The governor's arrested, Henderson's finished, and that recording is already public. How many more people have to get hurt?" For a tense moment, Ward's finger tightened on the trigger. Then slowly, he lowered the gun and raised his hands. Dawn was breaking as federal agents led the conspirators away in handcuffs. EMTs treated Sarah's injuries while the evidence team secured the briefcase and swept the area. News vans began arriving, drawn by the gunfire and multiple law enforcement vehicles. "Here," Agent Roberts handed Jeremiah his phone, which she had used to coordinate with her team. "You might want to see this." Every major news outlet was running the story. His recording of Ward's warehouse conversation played alongside footage of the governor's arrest. Headlines screamed about corruption exposed, a criminal empire collapsing, and justice finally being served. "I told you he'd make a good investigative journalist," Sarah said to Agent Roberts, wincing as medics cleaned a cut on her forehead. "He's got the instincts for it." Lisa hugged her son close. "He's got school to finish first, and maybe a few less dangerous career options to consider." More federal vehicles arrived, along with senior officials and prosecutors. The governor sat in the back of a police car, his perfect appearance now disheveled, his power stripped away. Henderson and Ward were separated for questioning. their network of influence crumbling by the minute. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly as media outlets demanded statements. The story was spreading beyond their city, leading to investigations in other states where Henderson had operations. Officials in those jurisdictions were stepping down or facing questions about their connections. "What happens now?" Jeremiah asked, watching the sun rise over their transformed world. "Now," Agent Roberts said, "we follow the evidence wherever it leads. Every false arrest, every corrupt official, every dirty deal. It all gets exposed, and people like Malik get justice." As if summoned by his name, Malik and his family arrived at the airstrip. They had been watching the news and came to support their friends. Malik hugged Jeremiah fiercely. "Man, when I said you should speak up in court, I didn't expect all this," Malik joked, gesturing at the aftermath of the confrontation. "Neither did they," Sarah added, nodding toward the arrested conspirators. "That's why they lost. They were so used to people staying quiet that they didn't know what to do when someone finally stood up." The morning news crews were setting up for live broadcasts, their cameras capturing the scene, federal agents cataloging evidence, corrupt officials in custody, and a community coming together to witness justice being served. Mr. Miller arrived with coffee and breakfast for everyone, his store's grand reopening temporarily forgotten in the excitement. Other community members followed, drawn by the news and a desire to see the people who had terrorized their neighborhood finally face consequences. "You know what this means," Malik said, watching Henderson being led to a federal transport vehicle. "Every case they touched, every person they framed, it all gets reviewed now. People who lost years of their lives because of their lies might get another chance." Jeremiah thought about how close he had come to remaining silent that first day in court, how fear had almost won, and how many lives might have stayed buried under the weight of corruption if he hadn't found the courage to speak up. "Look," Sarah pointed to her phone. Social media was exploding with similar stories from other cities, people recognizing the same patterns, the same tactics, the same abuse of power. The light they had helped shine was spreading, illuminating dark corners across the country. "They thought they could control everything," Agent Roberts observed, watching the governor being driven away. "The police, the courts, the media, but they forgot about ordinary people. People who see things, remember things, and eventually say something." Lisa squeezed Jeremiah's shoulder. "Not so ordinary," she said softly. "It takes extraordinary courage to stand up when everyone else is afraid." The morning grew brighter as more community members arrived. Someone brought signs from the earlier protests, now modified to celebrate victory instead of demanding justice. Children played while their parents shared stories of how the corruption had impacted their lives. Sarah, despite her injuries, was already writing, documenting everything for a story that would help other communities recognize and combat similar corruption. Agent Roberts coordinated with her team, ensuring every piece of evidence was properly secured and every witness protected. Jeremiah stood with his mother and friends, watching their neighborhood gather strength in the morning light. The conspiracy had been vast, its roots deep and its branches high, but in the end it had been dismantled, not by any single dramatic moment, but by the collective courage of individuals who refused to accept injustice as normal. "Hey!" Malik nudged him, pointing to the horizon where the sun continued its ascent. "Do you think things will really change now?" Jeremiah looked around at Sarah working despite her injuries, at federal agents protecting instead of threatening, at neighbors talking openly without fear, and at his mother standing proud and strong. "They already have," he answered. "Maybe not everything, but it's a start. Not all at once, but we demonstrated something significant." "What's that?" "That fear only holds power if we allow it to. That the truth is far more potent than their lies. That one individual speaking out can inspire others to do the same." As if to validate his point, more people began to arrive, bringing food and chairs, transforming the scene of confrontation into something resembling a community celebration. The fear that had kept them isolated was breaking down, replaced by the strength they discovered in standing united. The governor's plane sat empty on the runway, its engines cold, its escape plan thwarted. Soon it would be impounded as evidence, along with all the other symbols of power the conspirators had used to intimidate and control. However, the true victory wasn't merely in what had been halted, it was in what had been initiated, a community finding its voice, people discovering their strength, and the truth breaking through layers of deception. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them as they faced the dawn of a new day. The recordings were public, the evidence secured, the conspirators in custody, but more importantly, the fear was gone. In its place grew something stronger, hope born from courage, nurtured by truth, and shared by an entire community standing together in the morning light. 3 months after the dramatic confrontation at the airstrip, Malik Thompson walked confidently across the stage at the National Justice Reform Conference, his steps assured as he approached the podium. The packed auditorium fell silent, every eye fixed on the young man whose story had helped expose one of the largest corruption scandals in state history. Jeremiah sat in the front row, nestled between his mother and Sarah Chen, watching his best friend prepare to address the gathered crowd of activists, lawmakers, and justice reform advocates. The bruises from that night at the airstrip had long since faded, but the changes their stand had ignited continued to spread. "My name is Malik Thompson," he began, his voice strong and clear. 3 months ago, I was prisoner number 247891, accused of a crime I didn't commit. Today, I'm here to share how one person's bravery can transform an entire system. In the months since the governor's arrest, the world had shifted dramatically. Henderson's criminal empire had crumbled, exposing similar operations across multiple states. The federal investigation had expanded, leading to hundreds of arrests and the review of thousands of suspicious convictions. "When they put me in handcuffs that day," Malik continued, "I thought it was over. In our neighborhood, we had learned that the system wasn't designed to listen to people like us. But my best friend Jay Williams refused to accept that. He chose to speak up, even when doing so put his own life at risk." Sarah, now fully recovered from her injuries, typed quietly on her laptop, working on her latest story. Her investigation had earned her a Pulitzer nomination, but she seemed prouder of the changes it had helped create. Corrupt officials removed from office, wrongfully convicted individuals freed, and communities empowered to stand against injustice. "It wasn't just one person," Malik said, echoing what they had all come to understand. "It was a journalist who dug deeper when others looked away, a store owner who found the courage to expose threats against his business, federal agents who prioritized justice over politics, a mother who taught her son to stand up for what's right, and a community that finally declared enough is enough." In the audience, Mr. Miller nodded, sitting with other store owners who had come forward after that first domino fell. Their testimonies had helped prosecutors trace the full extent of Henderson's operation, revealing how legitimate businesses had been corrupted into parts of a vast criminal network. "The Governor Henderson and their conspirators thought they were untouchable," Malik continued. "They had built their power on fear, counting on people to remain silent and accept injustice as normal. But they didn't understand something fundamental about truth. It only takes one voice to inspire others to speak out." Agent Roberts, seated with her federal colleagues, smiled slightly. The investigation she had helped lead had expanded far beyond their initial expectations. The evidence from Henderson's briefcase had implicated officials in 3 more states, leading to a nationwide probe of similar corruption schemes. "Today, I'm not here just to share my story," Malik said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm here to announce the creation of the Truth Stands initiative. With support from community leaders and justice reform advocates, we will provide resources and protection for others who choose to speak out against corruption and abuse of power. The initiative had been Sarah's idea, born from their experiences. It would combine legal support, investigative journalism, and community organizing to help other neighborhoods fight similar battles. Already, groups from other cities had reached out, seeking guidance and sharing their own stories of systemic corruption. The scholarship program will be named after Chief Bradley, Malik revealed, causing a stir in the audience. Despite his past mistakes, he ultimately chose truth over power, sacrificing his life to expose corruption. His final evidence helped bring down an entire criminal empire. In the months since Bradley's death, his recorded testimony had proved crucial in securing convictions. The suicide ruling had been officially changed to homicide, and Ward had eventually confessed to arranging it on Henderson's orders. "But our work isn't finished," Malik continued, his expression growing serious. "While the major players in this conspiracy face justice, the conditions that allowed their corruption to thrive still exist in too many places. Communities still live in fear. People still hesitate to speak up. The system still favors power over truth." Lisa reached over and squeezed Jeremiah's hand. They had been through so much, threats, surveillance, violence, but had emerged stronger. Their neighborhood had transformed from a place of whispered fears to one of open conversation and mutual support. "That's why we're expanding our community oversight program," Malik announced. "Working with reformed police departments, we're creating new channels for reporting suspicious activities and protecting witnesses. The same cameras that once fed corrupt officials now help communities monitor those in power." The program had started in their neighborhood, with Mr. Miller's store serving as a pilot location. Now it was spreading, giving other communities tools to prevent corruption from taking root. Even some former officers, disgusted by what they discovered about their superiors, had joined the effort. "Education is also crucial," Malik said. "We're developing programs to help young people understand their rights, recognize abuse of power, and find safe ways to speak up. Because change doesn't just happen in courtrooms and conference halls. It happens in classrooms, on street corners, and in everyday moments when people choose truth over fear." Jeremiah thought about all the changes he'd seen in just 3 months. The corrupt officers who had arrested Malik had been convicted. Henderson and the governor faced decades in prison, and Ward had turned state's evidence, helping prosecutors unravel similar operations across the country. "But perhaps the most important change," Malik continued, "is in how we see ourselves. We're not just victims or witnesses anymore. We're advocates, organizers, and leaders. We've learned that justice isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together." The audience broke into applause, but Malik held up his hand. "I'm not finished, because this isn't just about what we've accomplished, it's about what comes next. Every week, we hear from more communities facing similar struggles, more people finding the courage to speak out, and more evidence of corruption being exposed." Sarah had needed to hire additional reporters just to keep up with all the tips and leads flowing in. Her initial investigation had opened floodgates, with people across the country recognizing similar patterns in their own communities and choosing to act. "The Truth Stands initiative will ensure they don't fight alone," Malik declared. "We provide legal support, media connections, and community organizing tools. We will help protect whistleblowers and witnesses. We'll make sure their stories are heard and their evidence reaches the right authorities." In the audience, Jeremiah spotted familiar faces from their neighborhood: basketball teammates who had supported Malik, store owners who had fought back against intimidation, families who had lost loved ones to false arrests and were now seeing justice served. But most importantly, Malik said, his voice softening with emotion, "We'll remind them of something powerful. No one who stands up for truth stands alone. Behind every whistleblower, every witness, and every person who chooses courage over fear, there's a community ready to stand with them." The standing ovation lasted several minutes as people rose to their feet. Jeremiah saw tears in his mother's eyes, and Sarah had stopped typing, watching Malik with proud satisfaction. Agent Roberts nodded approvingly, knowing that community support was often more effective than witness protection programs. After the speech, they gathered in the conference center's atrium. Community leaders from other cities crowded around, eager to learn from their experience. Journalists requested interviews, and lawmakers promised support for reform legislation. "Did you ever imagine this?" Malik asked Jeremiah quietly, taking a break from the crowd. "That day in court when you first stood up?" Jeremiah shook his head. "I just knew I couldn't let them send you to prison for something you didn't do. Everything else just grew from there like ripples in a pond." "Exactly," Sarah added, joining them. "One act of courage inspiring others, one truth leading to more truths, one community showing others what's possible." Lisa brought them coffee, her pride evident as she watched the crowd discussing plans for change. "You boys have started something important," she said. "Something that can't be stopped by threats or intimidation anymore." "Because it's not just about us now," Malik agreed. "It's about everyone who's ever faced injustice and felt powerless to fight back. Everyone who's seen corruption and thought they had to accept it. Everyone who's been afraid to speak up." Through the conference center's windows, they could see protesters gathering peacefully outside another courthouse in another city, inspired by their story to demand investigations into their own local corruption. The ripple continued to spread. "You know what's really changing?" Jeremiah observed. "It's not just the systems or the laws, it's the people. They're not afraid anymore. They're finding their voices, supporting each other, and standing up for what's right." Sarah nodded, already thinking about her next story. That's what Henderson and the governor never understood. They thought power came from instilling fear, but real power comes from people choosing not to be afraid anymore. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows behind them, but illuminating their faces as they looked forward. The path ahead wasn't easy. There would be more battles, more corruption to expose, and more communities needing support. But they weren't the same people who had started this journey. Jeremiah wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a voice for change. Malik wasn't a victim. He was a leader inspiring others. Sarah wasn't just reporting stories. She was helping create new ones. Lisa wasn't just a protective mother. She was a symbol of courage for other families. Together, they had shown that truth could overcome fear, that justice was possible if people stood united, and that one person's bravery could illuminate the path for others. The ripples of that first moment in court continued to spread, touching more lives, inspiring more change, and creating more hope. As they watched the sun set on another day of positive change, they knew their work wasn't finished, but they also knew something else, something powerful that gave them the strength to continue, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Truth would always stand as long as people stood together to defend it. The future was bright with possibility, not because the darkness had been completely banished, but because they had shown others how to light their own way through it. And that light, passed from person to person, community to community, would continue to grow stronger with each new voice that chose to speak out, each new heart that chose courage over fear, and each new spirit that chose to stand for truth. What would you risk to stand up for what's right? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful tales of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one voice speaking truth can change everything. Leave a comment below about a time when you chose to stand up, because every story of courage deserves to be heard. Remember, in a world where injustice often seems too vast to confront, it only takes one person to show others what's possible. Sometimes that person could be you.